Hachinohe, Aomori Prefecture, Japan, December 8, 2025. Late in the night, coastal residents of northern Honshu experienced one of the strongest seismic events to strike the region in recent years. At 23:15 local time, a powerful magnitude 7.6 earthquake occurred offshore, roughly 80 kilometers east of Aomori's coastline. Its hypocenter, estimated between 40 and 55 kilometers deep, placed the epicenter squarely within one of the most seismically active subduction zones in the world. The Japan Meteorological Agency sensors detected immediate intense ground motion, classifying several areas of Aomori and parts of Iwate with seismic intensities reaching the upper 6th level on the Japanese shindo scale, a classification associated with violent shaking capable of throwing people to the floor and causing widespread interior damage. Authorities reacted within minutes. The earthquake's intensity and offshore location triggered an urgent tsunami warning across Aomori, Iwate, and coastal zones in Hokkaido. Evacuation orders were issued for tens of thousands of residents in low-lying areas, fishing ports, and districts historically exposed to tsunami surges. Sirens rang out along the coastline, loudspeakers activated, and emergency cell phone alerts reached residents with unmistakable urgency. National broadcast channels interrupted programming to relay continuous seismic and tsunami updates. For many, the sudden switch from an ordinary evening to a moment of collective alarm revived memories of past disasters that remain deeply etched in Japan's national consciousness. Initial modeling suggested the possibility of tsunami waves reaching up to 3 meters. This scenario, while not as catastrophic as the events of major historical tsunamis, still posed a significant threat for coastal infrastructures, ports, and residential zones close to sea level. Within an hour, tide gauges positioned along northern Honshu began registering fluctuations, confirming the arrival of small tsunami waves. Ports reported surges ranging from 20 to 70 centimeters. Although these heights remained well below the worst-case projections, the pattern indicated a legitimate tsunami event, with multiple small waves hitting at irregular intervals following the main quake. Throughout the night, emergency crews were deployed to check submerged docks, flooded walkways, and damaged seawalls. Fire departments received calls from districts where furniture had overturned and windows had shattered due to the violent shaking. Injuries were reported in several locations, mostly due to falling objects. These included cuts from broken glass, head injuries, sprains, and impacts caused by collapsing interior structures or toppled appliances. Fortunately, no mass casualties or building collapses were reported during the initial hours of assessment. Rail services, including Shinkansen lines, were temporarily suspended across the region as safety protocols required extensive track inspections. Local train systems halted operations entirely, leaving some travelers stranded until temporary shelters could be arranged. Power outages affected several thousand households, especially in districts closer to the coastline, where electrical networks proved more vulnerable. Utility crews worked through the night to restore electricity to affected zones, and most outages were resolved within a few hours. Coastal nuclear facilities, an area of heightened concern for both Japanese citizens and international observers, initiated automatic checks. Operators reported no anomalies, leaks, or structural issues, and all systems remained stable. These reassurances helped diffuse early fears of any radiation-related incidents. By early morning, the tsunami warnings were downgraded to advisories as the sea gradually returned to normal patterns. However, seismologists cautioned the public that significant aftershocks could still occur over the following days. The possibility of a larger event could not be fully dismissed, prompting authorities to maintain a heightened level of vigilance. Emergency shelters remained open, and local governments urged residents not to return immediately to damaged homes until inspections were completed. This initial set of facts marks the verifiable account of what transpired in the first hours following the earthquake, but the story on the ground, lived by those who experienced the sudden rupture of the earth beneath their feet, paints a far more vivid and human picture, one that continues to unfold long after the tremor subsided. For residents of Hachinohe and surrounding areas, the night began like any other early winter evening. Some families gathered around low tables for late dinners, others watched television, and many prepared to sleep. The temperature outside was cold, with a damp wind sweeping across the coast, carrying the characteristic scent of the Pacific. Fishing boats were moored quietly at port, their ropes swaying gently with the low tide. Streetlights cast long reflections on wet pavement, and a calm silence lingered over quiet neighborhoods. Nothing suggested that nature was moments away from violently disrupting the stillness. The first sign for many was a faint, almost imperceptible tremor, a soft vibration in the floorboards, a slight sway of a hanging lamp, a glass clinking lightly against a shelf. Experienced residents of Aomori, familiar with minor quakes, might have ignored it under normal circumstances. But within seconds, the tremor escalated sharply. Walls creaked, windows rattled, and floors began to heave with the unmistakable intensity of a major seismic event. The shaking intensified rapidly, turning from harmless quiver to violent force. Furniture skidded across floors, cabinet doors flew open, and objects tumbled to the ground. In kitchens, plates shattered against tile. In crowded living rooms, people reached instinctively for support, trying to keep their balance as the earth convulsed beneath them. Outside, the streets echoed with car alarms triggered by the tremors. Shutters slammed against building facades. Dogs barked frantically. In high-rise apartments, the swaying motion was particularly intense, long, and rhythmic, causing dizziness and disorientation. Some people later reported the sensation of motion sickness, as if the entire building were floating and twisting at once. The moment the shaking stopped, a brief but heavy silence took over, the stunned quiet that follows a major quake. Then came the sirens. Across the coastline, tsunami alarms began to wail with an unmistakable urgency. Emergency speakers mounted on metal poles activated in sequence, broadcasting evacuation orders. The message was simple and direct: move to higher ground immediately. Families grabbed coats, blankets, and emergency bags prepared months or years earlier for exactly these situations. Those who had none improvised quickly, stuffing essentials into backpacks. Elderly residents were helped down staircases by neighbors. Parents lifted children into their arms, shielding them from falling debris. Car doors slammed as engines started, headlights flickered on, and lines of vehicles began forming in narrow streets. Some individuals chose to evacuate on foot, climbing steep roads leading away from the shoreline. The cold night air carried the sound of hurried footsteps, engine revs, and the distant rumble of emergency vehicles. Fishing communities reacted with speed and discipline honed from generations of living beside an unpredictable ocean. Fishermen secured their boats as rapidly as possible or abandoned them temporarily in favor of personal safety. Port workers activated flood barriers and retreated to evacuation points located on elevated terrain. Navies and coast guards patrolled offshore areas, monitoring sea behavior in real time. As the evacuation unfolded, news channels began broadcasting live updates. Anchors relayed seismic data while images of darkened streets and shaken residents appeared on screens nationwide. Many Japanese viewers felt a familiar knot form in their stomachs, a mix of concern, déjà vu, and the heavy weight of historical memory. Meanwhile, tide gauges started detecting irregular movements. The first wave, though small in height, confirmed the risk had been real. Water flowed over some docks and low-lying walkways, lifting scattered debris. At certain ports, the waves arrived in series, with intervals varying unpredictably. Emergency crews monitored each surge, ready to respond if the ocean pushed further inland. Inside evacuation shelters, gymnasiums, community centers, schools, people gathered on mats or blankets, sharing updates, flashlights, and hot drinks from thermoses. Volunteers assisted families, and officials walked through the crowd, reassuring residents that the situation was under control but not yet fully resolved. Children held tightly onto their parents, some still shaken by the intensity of the quake. Others appeared more curious than afraid, observing their surroundings with wide, uncertain eyes. As hours passed, fatigue began to settle in. Some residents drifted into light sleep, still fully clothed, leaning against walls or lying beside their emergency bags. Others spoke quietly about the moment the ground moved, comparing experiences, recalling what had fallen, what had broken, whether their homes had suffered visible damage. People exchanged stories of past quakes, discussing the difference in shaking intensity, duration, or sound. Each quake leaves its own impression, some violent and sharp, others long and swaying. This one had been abrupt, forceful, and alarming. Back in the city, emergency inspectors started assessing infrastructure. Bridges were checked for displacement or cracking. Water facilities were inspected for leaks. Firefighters entered buildings cautiously, searching for structural weaknesses. Hospitals operated at increased capacity, treating minor injuries while remaining prepared for more serious cases should aftershock strike. In some residential areas, the power outage created eerie pockets of silence and darkness. Flashlights illuminated shattered items scattered across floors. Families cautiously navigated their homes, turning off water valves, unplugging unstable appliances, and checking for gas leaks. The smell of dust, mixed with cold night air and occasional hints of spilled liquids, lingered in many interiors. When dawn broke, Pale light revealed the full extent of the night's chaos. Streets littered with debris, broken windows reflecting the morning sky, and weary residents stepping outside to assess the scene. Emergency responders continued to survey neighborhoods, documenting damages and ensuring that no one was trapped or in immediate danger. With the tsunami warning lifted, more people gradually returned home, though many remained cautious. Aftershocks were still expected, and every tremor risked destabilizing weakened structures. As the day progressed, Japan's meteorological and seismic agencies held press conferences. Scientists explained the characteristics of the earthquake, its depth, its tectonic context, its relation to the Pacific Plate subduction beneath the Okhotsk microplate. They highlighted the need for vigilance, noting that large offshore quakes sometimes precede even stronger events. This message resonated deeply, prompting many residents to keep emergency items within reach and remain ready for further alerts. Communities began cleanup efforts almost immediately. Broken shop windows were boarded up, fallen signs were removed from sidewalks, and volunteers helped sweep debris from residential streets. In fishing ports, workers collected scattered nets and equipment carried inland by the small surges. Boat owners checked hulls for cracks, tested engines, and inspected mooring points to evaluate any subtle damage caused by the oscillating water. Despite the limited physical destruction, the psychological impact was significant. Northern Japan is no stranger to earthquakes,